The Seth Leibsohn Show.
Well, happy Monday, February 17th, 2020. Today is the day we get to praise good men. It is George Washington's birthday celebration. Yes, Washington's birthday celebration. That is the official name of this federal holiday. I know it's vogue to call it President's Day, but that is not the official name. That is rather a postmodern attempt to not have a winner, to not reward excellence, to throw them all in there for showing up, so to speak, putting, say, Millard Fillmore on par with Washington, Lincoln, and Reagan, others. Not here. So I dedicate this monologue to the two greatest, whose birthdays are this month, Washington and Lincoln. But guess what? Ronald Reagan's birthday was this month, too. God bless February. We spoke a bit about Washington and Lincoln last week with Christopher Flannery. There is so much to say, and it all begins, I think, with what Henry Lee said of Washington at his eulogy, a phrase every child in America used to know, and I doubt knows today. First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. There is so much to say about Washington, it almost makes one weep to think he is out of favor and out of being taught to our children today. You know, we speak of instilling character here, and the best way, the way Aristotle taught us, is to put young people in the presence of character. To say, follow that man. Do what he does. No better man than Washington, and if you read anything anyone wrote about him, you'll see that again and again. He was the indispensable man. He led our independence, he put our country on its original footing, and having it all, being able, if he wanted, to do anything he could, he walked away, leaving it in the hands of others he trained and taught. Proving an elected despotism, after all, is exactly not what we fought for. Think of what was said of him, for it is perhaps in that way one truly gets to know someone. Not what they say of themselves, but what others say of them or of you. The aforementioned Henry Lee also said this of him at his eulogy, and it's poetic. Quote, to his equals he was condescending, to his inferiors kind, and to the dear object of his affections exemplarily tender. Correct throughout, vice shuddered in his presence, and virtue always felt his fostering hand. The purity of his private character gave effulgence to his public virtues. Close quote. Is that not beautiful? Do you know the story of his glasses? It's a great one. William Bennett used to teach this to children in classrooms across the country. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the new United States came close to disaster. The government owed back pay to many officers in the Army, men who had fought long and hard for the nation's freedom. But Congress had no money, and rumors abounded that it intended to disband the armed forces and send them home without pay. As the weeks passed, the Army's cry for pay grew louder. The soldiers insisted that they had performed their duty faithfully, and now the government should do the same. They sent appeals to Congress with no effect. Patience began to wear thin. Tempers smoldered. At last, some of the officers, encamped at Newborough, New York, issued what amounted to a threat. The Army would not disband until paid. If necessary, it would march on Congress. Mutiny was close at hand. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that one man alone could persuade the Army to give the government more time. On March 15th, 1783, George Washington strode into the Temple of Virtue, a large wooden hall built by the soldiers as a chapel and dance hall. A hush fell over the gathered officers as the tall figure took to the lectern at the front of the room. These men had come to love their commander-in-chief during the lean, hard years of fighting. Now, for the first time, they glared at him with restless and resentful eyes. A death-like stillness filled the room. Washington began to speak. He talked of his own dedicated service and reminded the group that he himself had served without pay. He spoke of his love for his soldiers. He urged them to have patience and pointed out that Congress in the past had acted slowly, but in the end would always act justly. He promised he would do everything in his power to see that the men received what they deserved. He asked them to consider the safety and security of their new country, begging them not to open the floodgates of civil discord and deluge our rising empire in blood. He appealed to their honor. Let me entreat you, gentlemen, on your part, he said, not to take any measures which, viewed in the calm light of reason, will lessen the dignity and sully the glory you have hitherto maintained. He paused. A restlessness pervaded the air. His audience did not seem moved. The men stared at him tensely. Washington produced a letter from a congressman explaining the difficulties the government now faced. He would read it to them. It would help them comprehend the new government's difficulties. He unfolded the paper. He started to read slowly. He stumbled over some of the words, then stopped. Something was wrong. The general seemed lost, slightly confused. The officers leaned forward. Then Washington pulled from his pocket something the men had never seen their commander-in-chief use before. Spectacles. "Gentlemen, you must pardon me," he said quietly. "I have grown gray in your service, and now find myself growing blind." It was not merely what the beloved general said, but the way he spoke, the few simple words, the humble act of this majestic man. It touched the soldiers in a way his arguments had failed to do. There were lumps in many throats, tears in every eye. The general quietly left the hall, and the officers voted to give Congress more time. George Washington had saved his new country from an armed rebellion. As Thomas Jefferson later said, the moderation and virtue of a single character probably prevented this revolution from being closed, as most others have been, by a subversion of that liberty it was intended to establish. George Washington. Think now about Abraham Lincoln. So much to say a third of a monologue or a half of a monologue can hardly do justice. I always start, though, whenever I'm talking about Lincoln, with what Professor Clinton Rossiter said of him, noting Lincoln was shot on Good Friday and died on Easter weekend. Rossiter said he was the Christ martyr of America's democratic passion play. Read his second inaugural. So short, it can be put in total on one wall of the Lincoln Memorial, which, by the way, is called a temple. Etched in stone over it are the words, "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." What of that martyr? Try this from his second inaugural. Quote, "1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union, even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it had already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph, and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible, prayed to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been fully answered. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom that offense hath come. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offenses came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Do you know the story of his travel to Richmond, the capital city of the capital of the Confederacy, once the war ended? April 4th, 1865. The story is told in the newspaper thusly. Quote, "He set foot on land, and his party was mobbed by jubilant crowds of African-American slaves, some of whom kneeled and then knelt down to kiss Lincoln's feet and the hem of his trousers. 'Do not kneel to me,' Lincoln rebuked them. 'That is not right. You must kneel to God only, and thank him for the liberty you will afterward enjoy. Words fail, don't they? But they never failed him. We are a republic because we are a republic of great men and great presidents. Not all, but the ones we need when we needed them. The third one I don't have time to put in my monologue today. We talk a lot about him here. That's Ronald Reagan. But I remind, for those that are interested, we are leading a tour of the Ronald Reagan Library on March 13th. I'll be leading that tour. We're keeping it deliberately small. We ask you to check out the tickets at 960thepatriot.com if you're interested. That's 960thepatriot.com. We'll have a great time. We few, we marry few. And we'll learn a lot about a great man. I hope you enjoy the rest of this show. It's a best of given George Washington's birthday. Hope you have a happy holiday. And we'll see you Tuesday. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about my friends at Guns Etc. They are true American patriots. They strongly support our president, and they have over 10,200 square feet of firearms and firearm accessories. Please take my advice and stop by their store, which is a symbol of American freedom, or visit them at gunsetcetera.com and have access to over $350 million in firearms merchandise.